Like all nonprofits, the Boston Club looks to develop strong, lasting relationships and collaborations with its partners and sponsors. We've been fortunate to work with more than 200 local, regional, and national organizations and individuals over our 43-year history. We want to thank them, especially those that are supporting today's event. I'd like to especially acknowledge our presenting sponsor, State Street Corporation. The Boston Club's relationship with State Street goes back many, many years. Former State Street Chairman and CEO Marsh Carter was a founding member of the club's corporate advisory board. We called them the guys who get it back in 1997, and he has been succeeded by each State Street CEO since. Through the years, many of State Street's very distinguished women executives have played important roles in the club. And of course, today, we're honored to welcome State Street's lead director, Dame Amelia Fawcett, to our corporate salute. Many thanks to State Street Corporation. Our supporting sponsors, the TJX Companies and Waters Corporation, are also longtime partners of the Boston Club, both with their financial support and their determined commitment to advancing women into positions of leadership. We are happy to have them with us again and thank them today. Thank you. The group of contributing sponsors you will see listed in your program represents a wide range of industries and professional services and are indicative of the breadth of connections the Boston Club has made through the years and right up to today. We believe that one of the club's major strengths and differentiator is that our members cross all industry sectors and professions. We'd like to thank American Tower Corporation, Cambridge Trust, Care.com, Deloitte, EOS Foundation, Ernst & Young, iRobot, and Sheehan, Finney, Bass & Green for their support. In your program, you'll also find an insert with the names of all of today's sponsors. Please take the list of sponsors with you when you leave today. They're on that list because they are proponents of good corporate leadership, they are believers in advancing women's leadership, and they are committed to the successful economic future of our region. Please support them as they have supported our mission today. It's because of these connections and collaborations we continue to thrive as a leader in the advancement of women's leadership. Please join me in thanking all of them. One of the very first objectives identified by the women who founded the Boston Club in 1976 was to increase the participation of women on corporate boards of directors. You may have heard of the somewhat infamous binders of women. In 1978, the Boston Club created binders of resumes of women qualified to serve on corporate boards and began to meet with local and regional business leaders to introduce them to the possibility of gender diversity in the corporate boardroom. That work continues today in a more electronic fashion as well as face-to-face in the mission of the club's corporate board committee. Here to let you know about its work and how you can help is the chair of our corporate board committee, Hilary Potts.
Thank you, Rita, and good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here, and before I get started with my remarks about the Corporate Board Committee and how you can help, I want to give a special thanks to longtime member T. Taggart. For the last decade, T has led our director circle, and she's helped us engage with corporate directors. And due to her efforts and many other efforts of the women in this room, we have many sitting public corporate directors at this event, as well as CEOs and former CEOs. So I want to thank all the women and the men for being strong advocates and standing with us. The Corporate Board Committee of the Boston Club works to advance more women onto the boards of public and for-profit companies. And we fulfill our mission in 3 ways. We do it through advocacy, education, and board placement. Today, I want to speak a little bit about what we do and how you can help. Most of the corporate board committees work, and we call ourselves the CBC. We like acronyms in the Boston Club. What we do is we work to identify, connect, and build relationships with CEOs, nominating committee members, and other key influencers in public and private companies. While gender diversity, all types of diversity is a hot topic in the boardroom, there's still much to be done. When the Boston Club first published its census some 17 years ago in 2003, only 50% of the 100 largest Massachusetts public companies had a women director. Now, fast forward to 2019, all except for 2 of the top 100 have a woman director. So that is something to celebrate, and I'd like to celebrate that. The diversity is on the rise, and more women of color are serving on boards. However, it begs the question, is 1 or 2 women on a board enough? Now, the research would say it's not. So we ask you to join us in our efforts to continue to shed light on this topic. And here's how you can help. If you're a board member, and I know that there are many board members out there, make sure that your searches for new directors and executives focus on a diverse pool of candidates. If you're a shareholder, make sure you vote your proxy and make it clear that you'll only support diverse slates of candidates. Now, if you're a business owner or an executive, make diversity an integral part of your company's DNA. Invest the time and the resources to help develop, engage, and empower future women leaders. May I ask the CBC members to raise your hand? I think many are over here at this table over here. Please raise your hand. If you are all interested in standing with us and supporting this effort, please see one of the CBC members, or you can also call our Boston Club office. We'd be happy to talk to you. The second area of focus, and we find it's very important, is board education programming. And several times a year, the Boston Club hosts, and we also partner with other organizations such as NACD New England and Essex Partners and others to create programs to help women learn about what it takes to be on a board and how to get prepared. In fact, next week, November 12th, Essex Partner is sponsoring a breakfast morning event. Jennifer Burris, I think we have 1 or 2 more seats left. These events tend to be very well subscribed. But if you're at all women that is interested in learning about a board, please check out our website for this November 12th event. Also, mark your calendars because we've just set a tentative date with NACD New England for the Aspiring Directors Program. And that date at this point, I don't know if I saw Ellen Ridgestone, but that date is tentatively for June 11th. So there's quite a few programs scattered throughout the years that help us help with board education. So come, learn about board service, learn about how you can work on your skills and experiences, even if you're maybe 5 or 10 years out from being on a board, so that you're then board ready. Finally, the last thing we do, both directly and indirectly, is that we influence many board placements. Our goal is to provide top-notch qualified women candidates for board searches. And every year, we participate and actively provide names to over 25 board searches. So if you at all are looking for women board members and are having trouble, please, we would love to talk to you. We have a database of qualified women candidates, and we can probably help. If you are a woman executive or you know of a woman that is looking to be on a board, we would love to have your resume in our database. Now, it's really pretty simple. If you're a Boston Club member, I encourage you to keep your membership profile up to date. You can even upload a resume and a bio. So do that. Now, some of you might be saying, I'm not a Boston Club member. I'll talk about that in a second. But if you want to have your resume in our database, please send it to info@thebostonclub.com, and we'd love to have you in our database. if you're not a member, I really encourage you as a woman. We have over 650 like-minded women executives and entrepreneurs. It's a fabulous club. We put on large events like this and small, intimate events. As we continue our work to place senior executive women into the boardroom, the Boston Club's annual corporate census, which is on your seat. Please don't sit on it. You might want to take it and read it. It's a great read. Highlights how we recognize the value that women bring to the boardroom and identify what still needs to be done. For 17 years, 3 Boston Club women have been the power behind this annual report. Co-authors, and they're sitting at this table, number 5, Susan Adams, Pat Flynn, and Tony Wolfman, are very well known in the community for their tireless and persistent effort. So we thank them very much. The Boston Club's census of women directors and executive officers of Massachusetts' largest companies has become a recognized report and raises awareness of the value of gender diversity in corporate governance. And today, I am thrilled to ask longtime CBC and Boston Club member, co-author, Tony Wolfman, to come to the podium, and she's going to share with us some of the particular insights on this year's census. Thank you, Tony.
Okay, thanks, Hilary, for the kind introduction. All of us on the CBC are really grateful to you for your wonderful leadership. So you can see in your programs, I have 3 tasks. I'll try to get them done in reasonably quick order. It would be an understatement to say that it's an enormous pleasure to be able to present the results of this year's census. I know that I speak for my co-authors, Bentley professors Patricia Flynn and Susan Adams, when I say that we were thrilled when we saw the results of our research and analysis this year. In short, the positive momentum that we documented in last year's report continued to accelerate over the past year and has produced some significant gains. Before I tell you about those gains, I want to take a minute to recognize Ernst & Young. Under the leadership of Jane Steinmetz, EY has been a tremendous supporter of the Boston Club, and among its many contributions is the design and production of the census. So I hope you'll join me in thanking EY. Okay. Now, for those of you who haven't yet had your second cup of coffee, here are a few reasons to wake up. As of June 30, 2019, 98 of the 100 largest public companies in Massachusetts have at least one woman director. This is an increase of 9 over last year. Only 2 companies have all-male boards, and they are among a small group of controlled companies with a majority of insider directors. 33 companies have 3 or more women directors. 12 companies have 3 or more women executive officers. Women constitute at least 40% of the directors of 8 census companies and at least 40% of the executive officers of 9 companies. In addition, both the boardrooms and the executive suites of 10 companies each include at least 30% women, and that's double the number of companies last year. And now, I could say, we should have a drum roll. We have only 100 this year. There were 8 last year. These are the companies, for those of you who haven't ever been here before, These are the companies that have no women in any of their leadership positions. Women are now 24% of all directors of the 100 companies, and that's up 3% from last year. They constitute 27.5% of all independent directors, and that figure is up 3.5% from last year. 29 of these women directors are women of color, and that's a 30% increase over their number last year. So these are just a few of the statistics that you'll find in our report. And while not all of the rest are so positive, all of the trends are still going in the right direction. As has been the case since our first report in 2003, the Boston Club will continue to focus on those companies with few or no women in key positions, as well as those in need of board refreshment. So, what accounts for the increases we've seen this past year? With respect to boards of directors, where the jumps have been most significant, I can suggest a few factors, some of them interrelated. This year, for the first time, women constituted a majority of the new independent directors who joined the boards of Census companies that were in our report both last year and this year. Each year we track turnover from last year's census to this year's, and there were 93 continuing companies. That's 40 women out of a total of 76 new independent directors. The accelerating rate at which women have been added to these boards over the past few years is the primary reason for the recent increases in the number and percentage of women directors. And for those of you who may be interested in putting this into a national context, according to Equilar, women were only 20% of the directors of the Russell 3000 companies, which includes many but not all of our census companies. And they accounted for only 42% of all new directors added to those boards. And among the S&P 500, of which only 23 of the largest Massachusetts companies are members, Spencer Stuart reports that women constitute 26% of all directors and 46% of the new independent directors. So even though most Massachusetts companies haven't yet reached parity, which of course is our goal, as a whole, we look pretty good. With regard to board turnover, it appears that more companies are paying close attention to board succession planning. Thus, 23 of the 51 independent directors who left census company boards over the past year were age 70 or older. And the relatively large number of aging and long-tenured directors who remain in place, a group that's largely male, suggests that there's a significant opportunity for continued board refreshment going forward. A number of years ago, in one of our earlier census reports, we quoted a governance expert who referred to U.S. public company boards as pale, male, and stale. That's certainly no longer true of most Massachusetts boards. In this respect, it's interesting to note that long-tenured and older directors are mainly, though not totally, on boards that have few women. For example, 9 of the 12 companies on whose board at least half of the independent directors are age 70 or older have only one woman on their board. Another factor is that over the past few years, a wider range of institutional investors, including some private equity firms, as well as heavy hitters like State Street and BlackRock, have added their voices to those of the many socially responsible investors that have long advocated for greater diversity in the boardroom and executive suite, including use of the Rooney Rule when filling vacancies. And we all know that when money talks, companies listen. Finally, the increasing clout of women who've risen to leadership positions in the boardrooms and executive suites of Census companies has likely focused greater attention on the inclusion of women and people of color in board and executive succession planning, expanding the leadership pipeline and enlisting the support of their male colleagues in companies that have lacked a critical mass of women and people of color in these positions. And on that note, I want to say a few words about these women leaders. In the special analysis section of the Census report, you will find information about the women who hold a range of board leadership positions, including CEOs, board chairs, lead directors, and committee chairs. There's also a rough breakdown of the executive positions held by women in Census companies. And when you have some time, you take a look at Appendix C, back of the Census. It lists all of the women executive officers in the 100 or in those Census companies that have women executive officers and shows the wide variety of their roles. Not only are all of these women providing valuable leadership to the companies they serve, but they can be important mentors to the talented women who are the directors and executive officers of the future. Speaking of women in key leadership positions, I want to turn our attention to a special tribute that the Boston Club is paying this morning to the extraordinary women who have served as CEOs of Census companies since our first report in 2003. The names of these women, together with the companies they led, and the years in which those companies and they were in the Census, are listed in your programs. And we're delighted that several of them could be with us today. And they are in alphabetical order. Gail Goodman, the former CEO of Constant Contact, the online marketing company whose logo still appears at the bottom of so many of our incoming messages. I don't know if Mary Ann Haino has made it yet. She was expected. She's the current CEO of Lantheus Holdings, a global leader in the development and manufacture of diagnostic imaging products. Shacey Petrovic, current CEO of Insulet Corporation, which makes medical devices for diabetics and others who use injectable drugs. Catherine Potter, current CEO of 5-Star Senior Living, which operates a wide range of senior living communities located across the U.S., and Laura Sen, former CEO of BJ's Wholesale Club, the membership-based warehouse club of which so many of us have been members. Would those of you who are here please stand so we can thank you for your leadership? You're over there. Come on. Come on. Thank you. Right. Back in 2003, in our first census, there were only 2 women CEOs. Mary Puma, who is CEO of Excelis Corporation Technologies, and she remains CEO but has a board meeting this today. And Pam Reeve, who is CEO of Lightbridge, which provided products and services to the wireless communications industry. She expected to come and last night was called away on an emergency. Now, to the main event on this morning's agenda. We're fortunate to have with us today 2 particularly outstanding women leaders, Dame Amelia Fawcett, the lead director of State Street Corporation, and Shirley Liang, our favorite Boston Globe columnist. Their bios are in your program, so I'll only say a few words about each of them. Amelia Fossett has had an exceptionally wide-ranging career, beginning in law practice, moving into investment banking and financial services, and rising to leadership positions in both the private and public sectors. Currently, in addition to being State Street's primary non-executive face to the outside world of regulators, shareholders, and other stakeholders, she is the non-executive chair of the Guardian Media Group and of Kinnevik, a Swedish investment company focused on digital consumer brands. Among her many nonprofit activities is her recent appointment as chair of the Board of Trustees of the Royal Botanic Gardens. And speaking of gardens, Amelia has her own. She grows lavender at her Welsh farmhouse, and since 2003, her company, Chilcott Company, has been producing and selling lavender-infused woolen blankets, cushions, and other products for the home and for dogs. Check out its website, chilcottuk.com. Right. Shirley Liang's successful career has been in the world of journalism. She's been a reporter at several newspapers, including the Wall Street Journal, was the business editor of the Boston Globe, as well as the Globe's interim editorial page editor. She's currently a columnist and associate editor at the Globe. Shirley's column is alone worth the price of a subscription to the Globe. While she focuses broadly on the world of business, she doesn't hesitate to take on topics that pique her interest. A few years ago, when I first read about the State Street statue of the fearless girl on Wall Street, I immediately thought of Shirley. She is definitely fearless. In his most recent online director's letter, Dan Daly restated what we've espoused for many years. Good governance is about asking the tough questions and getting real answers. In their respective worlds, Amelia Fawcett and Shirley Liang do just that. So please join me in welcoming Amelia and Shirley to the stage.
I do have a dog. Good morning, everybody. This is amazing. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's more like it. I've only had 2 cups of coffee, maybe 2.5. Anyways, I'm very excited to do this fireside chat with Dame Amelia Fawcett. Is that what people call you?
Well, do you really want to know?
I do.
So the proper way is Dame Amelia.
Dame Amelia.
But my godchildren and my nieces call me Oatmeal.
Oatmeal. Wait, why oatmeal?
Because when they were little, they couldn't say Aunt Amelia. It came out Oatmeal. Now, that was 29 years ago. And the problem is that I'm now called Dame Oatmeal, which is only matched by a story I'll tell later about, in addition to being Dame Amelia, I am the lady usher of the Purple Rod. And when one of my godchildren said, "Oh, come sit next to me, Lady Purple, oh, Dame Poncy Poncy." So I'm either Dame Oatmeal or DP.
DP,
You
all
take
right.
your pick.
But I can call you Amelia today.
You can.
Anyways, so you were born in Boston, and you went to Wellesley, but you spent all but 2 years of your career in Europe. So what drew you to Europe?
Actually, I don't know, grew up in Boston, I guess that's why, but I had always wanted to live in London. Mm-hmm. And so when it came time to choose a law firm, I went through Martindale Hubbell and picked all the ones with a London office, because I was hoping that in 1983, 4, 5, I might get to London. And I got a phone call from the senior partner's office saying, "Mr. Brock will see you at 3:30 today." Oh, I'm sorry, you've got the wrong number. I didn't ask to see Mr. Brock. No, you don't understand. Mr. Brock will see you at 3:30 today. Anyway, he came down to my office and he said, "We'd like you to go abroad. You're very interested in Europe?" I said, "Yes." "London." "No, Paris." "Paris? I don't want to go to Paris. I want to go to London." And he said, "Well, it may come as a bit of a surprise to you, but most people in this office speak English. Very few speak French. You're going to Paris." And so 6 weeks later, I found myself in Paris.
And you're trained as a lawyer. You went to
I
law
went
school.
to law school at the University of Virginia after 2 years as a paralegal, actually. So at the university, as I say, at the University of Virginia, I passed the New York bar. Not a pleasant experience for anybody who's done it. And then I was in New York for about a year and a half, and then I moved to Paris, and I've been there ever since. So it was supposed to be a 2-year stint. 34 years later, I'm still in Europe.
Now, did you ever spend any time in London? You did go to London, right?
No, yeah, I was only in Paris a year and a half,
Year and a
2
half,
years.
and then
The rest of it has all been in London.
Been London, right?
Or Wales,
right.
depending.
Yeah. And so, have you thought about how your career would have been different had you stayed in the U.S.?
I think that's probably twofold. So when I left Sullivan and Cromwell in 1980, end of 86, I went to Morgan Stanley, where I had 2 offers, one as a lawyer and one as a corporate finance banker. Being somewhat risk averse, I am so not risk averse now, but being somewhat risk averse, I said I'll take the legal job because I know that one, which proved to be prescient because we had the crash 6 months later. And I decided that I think had I stayed as a lawyer and gone back to New York, I would have gone to the corporate group and done pretty standard deals, lots of standard deals. And instead I ended up doing, because it was a small office in Paris, we had two associates and a partner, so a man and a dog, and I was something else. And I didn't register on the registry, and I had 3 strikes against me as far as the elite in French were concerned. I was a woman, I was an American, and I was a lawyer. So I was persona non grata, as they say. But anyway, there I did everything from samurai bonds for the French government, obviously in Japan. I did U.S. offerings for Crédit Foncier and L'Électricité de France. I did distribution agreements for Romani Conti. I bought a vineyard for a partner at First Boston. You kind of did what had to be done. And there was a searing experience for 2 reasons. One, it was the first time you go up in Boston, you go to Wellesley, you go to the University of Virginia, you work in New York, you got a pretty big network. I went to Paris, I didn't know anybody. I had to speak a different language. I'm negotiating in French. The French aren't being particularly nice to me. I had no network. So that was the first. And the second thing was you had to do it in another language. Part of it wasn't too difficult. The French hadn't quite francophoned their language. It was still, Monsieur, pensez, j'ai un problème avec le clause de swap et le clause de set off. It wasn't that difficult, but it was difficult. So that was a very different experience that I wouldn't have had in New York. And then, we can get into it later, but the experience at Morgan Stanley was really wonderful at a time when Europe was exploding, and that's why I decided to stay. 1987, 86, people were starting to talk about 1992, that seems a long time ago, single market, cross-border ability to do deals, and the American firms brought with them extraordinary American discipline, elan, and technology. Securitizations, swaps, commercial paper, things that people in London just hadn't done. And we had big banks. So I was able to work in a firm that was expanding massively, and that would not have happened in the States.
And have you thought about what it was like to be a woman working in Europe versus or specifically the UK, you spent most of your career there, versus your American counterparts?
Yeah, I was fortunate. I mean, at Sullivan and Cromwell, I worked in a firm that in 1982-3 canceled their memberships in clubs where all of their lawyers couldn't be members. Piping Rock and a variety of the ones downtown in New York. They believe very much in a meritocracy. Wasn't perfect, lots of issues, no question, but they tried. And same for Morgan Stanley. I mean, John Mack was a bit of a bully, but he still believed in a meritocracy, and so did Morgan Stanley. So I worked in 2 firms where, and again, particularly at Morgan Stanley that was growing, they were asking people to do a lot of things. And the more you did, the more he gave you. And the more fun it was. So I was fortunate to work in a firm that notionally, and in substance in many ways, believed in promoting women. And actually, it didn't matter. If you believe in promoting women towards the end of the 90s, but before then, it was a meritocracy. Now, had I been in a British firm, There is absolutely no doubt that in 1994 I would have been the chief administrative officer, or in 2002 I would have been the chief operating officer. In 1989, I was asked by a partner at Slaughter May if I'd like to go to a Guildhall dinner, black tie, one of these classic British events. So I went. There were 250 people there, and there were only 5 women. And this is supposed to be a big city event. Roll forward 12 years later for the retiring dinner at the Guildhall for the senior partner of KPMG. There were 8 women, and only 3 of us had management roles. Wow. Unfortunately, as you will have gathered from even my opening remarks, I'm not backwards about coming forwards, and I feel rather strongly about a few things, which Morgan Stanley sadly discovered very early on in my career. One day, I was working on a deal, it was about 1989, and the great and the good of the city were there. Cazenove, Goldman, Morgan Grenfell. And this old duffer from Cazenove was sitting over there, and we walk in. It was the vice president, which in those days was a very senior role at Morgan Stanley, 2 associates, me as the lawyer, and an analyst. And because the hostile deal had gone agreed, it was a documentation meeting. So as we walk in, this guy in the corner says, "I say, do you think she could get us a cup of tea?" Now, interestingly, 2 things happened. On my side of the table, they were waiting for World War III to erupt. On that side of the table, they were wondering why the gal couldn't get a cup of tea. So I said, I grew up in Boston, I went to Wellesley, very liberal parents, worked at Sullivan & Cromwell. I had never seen this before. So it tells you a little bit of the different jurisdictions. So I didn't know what to do. And I put the papers down, I said, I'd be very happy to get you a cup of tea, but I think we should start with the documentation correct so we could take a tea break after the end of the CDNA. And you can see, so it does give you some idea of what the difference of the jurisdictions were.
But sitting here in Boston, we read about the progressive parental leave programs in the UK, across Europe, and so we have this image that that Europe is far ahead or more progressive in terms of advancing women, in their corporations. But it doesn't sound like that's the case.
Well, it's certainly. Remember what I was saying. It was early on, and it's better now. And you and I talked about this the other day. Yeah. There are some countries, Norway, France, Germany, Italy, maybe Iceland, who have quotas. For Norway, it's 40%, and they've had them since 2004. Other countries have goals, so that would be the UK and a number of other countries. And that has made a difference. Sweden, where I'm a chairman of a company, as you know, Sweden has targets. That has made a difference. And I would like to salute the Boston Club. When you have, for 17 years, shed light, as my mother used to say, sunshine is a great disinfectant. When you shed light on what's good and what's bad, you do get change. And you can do it in different ways. And I know I'd also like to applaud State Street, who several years ago started putting in targets, not quotas, but you get what you measure. You have to be intentional. And so I think we have made more progress in a number of areas in Europe. The United States thinks it's a meritocracy and it's at the cutting edge of these things. Well, you are a little behind. 50% of the workforce is women, 30% of the managers are women, and 9 or 10% of the women are in the C-suite. Well, I don't think that's a meritocracy. It doesn't go against any diverse statistic that you have. So, and some of the programs, but it's hard. This is really hard.
So, speaking of boards, you served on at least half a dozen corporate boards. So how did you get on your path to be a board director? And talk a little bit about the various boards you've been on.
I was at Morgan Stanley, and I was responsible for building, among my many other responsibilities, was sort of building our relations with government, with the press, throughout Europe. And one of the things that I did was make sure that we were getting close to a Labour government when it was coming in, which was a very non-PC thing to do in Britain. If you if you were a company, you were with the Tories. And I said, yeah, being American, I said, we can't do that. We don't take sides. Our clients are on both sides. We're going to help both sides. So we, and I, wearing pink, my nickname at Morgan Stanley was Pinky. I, wearing pink, and being a woman, and being senior, stood out. So I was asked, and because I was open-minded, to be honest with you, when this first Labor government came in '97. So I was asked to lend my expertise and advice, which they thought I had, to a number of government initiatives. So I was fairly well-known in the Treasury, in the Bank of England, in the Department for Trade, et cetera. So when the Bank of England was looking for a new director for their court of directors, if you can believe it, I asked someone, I said, why do you call it the court of directors? It's a board of directors. Oh, well, but we've had a court of directors since 1674. I said, yeah, but State Street's had something since before we had board companies, and it's still called a board. Anyway, so I was asked by Treasury if I put my name forward, and I went on that board. So that was where clearly an external, very high-profile external role, where I was deemed to maybe bring something.
And what year was this?
2004.
2004.
But here's the interesting, I was thinking about it last night, actually. So I went on that board, and think about giving advice to people. They asked me to take on the audit committee and the risk committee, and I became chair of the audit committee. And what that meant was throughout the crisis, I was on what's known as the transactions committee. So the non-executive director and a senior non-exec and I were the only non-Bank of England people who were in on every single decision, bailout decision, that the bank made in those 2 or 3 years. So the committee mattered. It also mattered for another reason. The head of the Guardian Media Group, the chairman, was on my committee. He saw how I ran a committee. He saw what, I could build consensus more or less. He knew I knew something about the market. So he asked me if I would consider going on the board of the Guardian Media Group. The Guardian Media Group led to another one. So there's been a connection between many of those boards. Kinnevik was a pure executive search play. State Street, I suspect, but I don't know, and Jeff might be able to find out, but maybe not. I'm not a whistleblower, Jeff, don't worry. But because Egon Zehnder was actively involved with the Bank of England and did a board evaluation, I spent a lot of time with them. Around that time, State Street was looking for some foreign, non-American, I had both passports, people with financial services expertise who'd built businesses to join the board. Egon Zehnder was the search firm. So my guess is the Bank of England actually led to 2 or 3 different opportunities, and the Bank of England came from putting my head above the parapet outside the firm.
You and I talked earlier, and you have actually 3 criteria that you use to determine whether or not you should serve on a board or which board positions you want to go after. Talk a little bit about that. What's the lens you use?
I mean, everybody will have a different lens. So when I say it might appeal to you, it might not. But I have 3 things, whether it's a board or a new initiative or project. I look at 3 things. Number 1, do I have a passion for the people and the products? I'm not going to say I had a passion for custody, but I loved the people. And I've developed a passion for custody. And for asset management, Cyrus. And for law. And for HR. And for markets. Anyway, so I developed that. That's the first thing. Because what's going to be required is not just going to a meeting, making a few comments, collecting a check, and go home. You have to go the extra mile, and I'll tell you my Aunt Rebecca's story in a minute. You have to really want to be engaged, and it was very important in the crisis. 2, do they share your values? When you're in a big, complex organization where your personal credibility and responsibility is on the line, you want to be working with some people who you know are going to try and do the right thing. They're going to get it wrong. We all do. But they're going to try and do the right thing. And the third is, can you make a contribution? And I credit Ron Logue with teaching me something that I have used since 2006. I joined, my first 2 meetings at State Street were on the phone. We were doing the IFIN transaction and the Currenex transaction. 3 people on the board knew who I was. 8 or 9 had no idea who I was. I mean, they did, but they didn't. And we were talking about Currenex, and Ron said, excuse me, everybody, Amelia, you're on the phone in London. You have experience in sales and trading and markets and infrastructure. What's your view? What he did in that moment was telegraph to me and to the board, this person's got a role to play, a contribution to make, and it made the beginning of my very long tenure at State Street a very happy one. So those are the three things I need. Now, I said sometimes you have to go the extra mile, and that means you should sit on committees, you should spend time with management where you can. When I was a little girl, I had a row with my parents. We had a summer house in Maine. I had a row with my parents. My mother would have told you it was a far too frequent occurrence. She and I were far too alike, and so we fought like cats and dogs. And so I stormed out of the house, and all the elderly relatives were there, probably why I stormed out of the house. And I marched across the lawn, I marched down the dock, and I did what any picture of that period would tell you, I sulked. And about 5 minutes later, I heard tap, tap, tap. And I kind of looked at back my grandfather's older sister, Aunt Rebecca, white hair, rimless glasses, silver-topped cane, is moving her way down the dock. And she stands behind me, and she says, Amelia, you must put your best foot forward. And I'm going, yeah. And keep it there! That's commitment. You got to go the extra mile.
Amelia, you also, when we were talking earlier, you would consider this is your word, not mine, a board failure.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that.
Yes, talk a little bit about that.
So I was asked by a friend if I would be a chairman who would help an entrepreneurial company move out of that and get ready for a listing. And I liked him. He was a really nice guy. I loved the business because I'm very interested, you could tell from the Botanic Gardens, in the environment, in green things. This was a voltage optimization company. And I met the founders. I shook their hands like, these guys give me the creeps. I'm not sure these are my kind of guys. But heart ruled over head. I was trying to do this guy a favor. He's in a bind. I can manage it. I said, you can never manage it. So off we went, and 8 months in, it became clear that there was incipient fraud in the organization. These guys were bad hats, and I had to step down from the board immediately, report them to the accountants, report them to the lawyers. And for me, it was a very sad and unpleasant experience. And my gut told me, rule number 2, do they share your values? Clearly not. They were spivs. I did it anyway. A big mistake.
So in March, State Street appointed you its independent lead director. So how is that role different from other roles you've had on boards?
So it's analogous almost totally to a non-executive chairman role, which I've done in a number of places. And I credit my predecessor, Ken Burns, with really creating a role that is hugely substantive, and I hope, particularly with him, and we'll see with me, very valuable to the firm. And what he demonstrated was that you could have the clout and impact and assistance for non-State Street people, shareholders or other stakeholders of the firm, by being the senior independent director. He went to he went to every committee meeting. He met regularly with the CEO and the chairman and the CEO, as I do. He would participate in annual meetings where appropriate. He would do meetings with investors and analysts where appropriate. So it's not a traditional, she's the lead director, what I call lead director light, where you're the lead director, you go to a couple of meetings and kind of that's it. It is effectively what you'd expect a non-executive chairman role to be. And so when we think about these things, and people say, particularly in Europe, where the roles are not combined, 90-10 against, people say, well, isn't that a problem for State Street? And I explain what I do, and they say, oh, that's what a non-executive chairman does, precisely.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the Boston Club census numbers from this year. So what jumped out at you?
I hope they're not in the room. In 2019, we still have a 0-0? You must be kidding me. even 1 0. So that was on the negative side. Positive side is that more than 50% of the incoming directors were women. Brilliant. The increase in senior women from, I think, up 8% to 20%, something, is a huge increase. The increase in, the significant increase in people of color in parts of that census, I think is brilliant. And again, it's a testament to what we in Britain call naming and shaming. And the investment banking industry is notorious for it. And there's a reason. They're very competitive. You don't want to be in the sin bin, but you want to be with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley or State Street Bank in New York. You don't want to be down there. And I think, huge credit to doing something very bold. A group of women basically said to a group of men, we are going to tell the world exactly what's going on. And you have had huge results, huge progress as a result.
So beyond, I love this, sin bin?
Sin bin, yeah, that's what
I
they
haven't
say.
heard that.
I don't like football, their football, at all, because they're a bunch of hooligans. But when a player's sent off, he's gone into the sin bin.
Sin bin, okay. I get naming and shaming. I think we use that here too. So beyond that, what else moves the needle? And the Boston Club has been tremendous in terms of tracking the progress or lack of progress from year to year. But what else? What do you think matters in terms of moving the needle in terms of women on boards and women in the C-suite?
I think a variety of things. Clearly, targets matter, and management and the board have to own them. And there is a role for women and for men who aren't necessarily the chairman of things to put their hand in the air and say, sorry, I don't like this. This is unacceptable to me. I think we should measure things. And not just measure it for the sake of measuring it, but again, I credit State Street. They set targets, they monitored progress against the targets, and people were compensated and promoted on how they did against those targets. So it has to be intentional. There has to be total and critical buy-in from management and from the board, and you have to ruthlessly manage. This is a big problem in the UK. You have to ruthlessly manage your search firms because they're going to do the same old thing. It's the same old retreads of male, pale, and stale candidates. We asked for a 50-50. Said, "Oh, it's very difficult." No, it's not. So that's a big issue. I think the point made in the census that more senior women on boards and in the C-suite makes a big difference, is beginning to make a big difference. And I think senior women also have to mentor and sponsor other women. And we often don't. And I have to say, I grew up in a cutthroat industry, and sometimes some of the women I knew cut the ladder out after they got up the ladder. You asked me what my worst career advice I had, and it was given to me by several women, which is you have to be more male than the men. Please note, I wear pink. I have never worn a trouser suit in my life. I don't think I've ever owned an charcoal gray pinstripe suit. And it was bad advice, because actually I think I've been quite successful because I'm perfectly happy to be direct and honest and difficult and sometimes ruthless. But I hope I do it in a way that women bring to the table, which is a slight toning down of the edge.
Back to this whole notion of targets instead of quotas. Without giving any trade secrets from State Street, but what does a target look like? Because you could set up a target that's not very effective. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, clearly, as with business, and let's be clear, you do this because it's fundamental to your business. Diversity and inclusion and culture isn't some little bauble that's off on the side of your business. It's integral to your strategy and how you do your business. And therefore, like other targets, they have to be stretch targets, and they have to be monitored. And when you're done with that set of targets, you set another set of targets that's even more stretching. So it might be you want 30% of your executive officers will be women within 3 years. So it's a target, it's a percentage, and a time, a realistic time period. And Kathy's here, but State Street blew through most of their targets. They missed a couple, but the dial for my first 8 years on the board, a little less, just didn't move. We set targets, board was behind it, management was behind it, the dial went boom. And it's, it's still not perfect. We have ways to go, but we are making progress now. And people see it. I think people in the firm see it, people outside the firm see it, and the board is watching it very closely.
Okay, so we're also supposed to talk about the financial crisis.
What do we have?
Specifically, the next one.
Yeah, we
and of course, you're going to...
Wait. Here's my crystal ball.
Oh, yes.
Financial crisis.
So when will the next one happen?
I have no idea. I certainly didn't predict the last one. I think it's not a question of whether, but is when, and I don't know. I think I looked at it, and again, I'm being beadily watched by my general counsel and the head of asset management and the head of markets, who know a shed load more about this than I do. But I'll give you my Welsh lavender farmer's take on this. I think they could come from one of two places. There's either a geopolitical spark. I don't know what is. Oh, let's come think closer to home. Corbyn gets elected in the UK. Impeachment may be here. Really serious China trade problems. Nastiness in the Middle East, particularly in Iran. So a big geopolitical, think about it, we've had 10 years of uninterrupted growth, quite strong in the US, pretty strong in the UK until recently. We've even had it in the anemic Eurozone. The biggest, I think, period of that in the post-war era, equity markets are an all-time high, particularly the last couple of weeks. So if there's a geopolitical hit to confidence, then I think all of that's very good, but the law of gravity hasn't changed. What goes up can come down. And I think you could have a serious lack of market confidence. Equity markets fall down, spills over to the fixed income markets and the money markets. And I think what we found with the wobbliness in the money markets recently is liquidity is an issue. Liquidity could be an issue for banks and non-banks, like hedge funds. And then I think you see an unraveling that will be quite severe. So that's one scenario. Another scenario would be cyber. The regulators aren't always wrong, and on this one I think they're right to be concerned about it. And again, it's a cyber event that creates a systemic crisis that's most likely to be caused by a nation state. We can be as resilient and as well prepared from a cyber perspective as possible. But if an intentional rogue state, take Iran, intends to take part of our system down, they will do it. That goes back to the confidence issue, and you have the unraveling again. I mean, obviously, individual firms can be attacked. They have been. That's not great. It's unlikely to be systemic. But if they go for the markets or serious financial market utilities, et cetera, I think that could potentially be an issue. And one of the things that I do on a number of our boards, we do it at State Street, is we do often think of extremely low frequency events. Scenario planning to think through what would happen, what would we do, where could the risk be coming from. I think that's even more important now than it was before.
I mean, do you think the world has learned from the mistakes of the 2008 financial crisis?
Yes and no. So firms are better capitalized. They could be resolved. We have resolution and recovery plans, sensible, a pain in the neck, but sensible. Regulators work better together. The scenario planning and risk management, and even the focus now clearly on operational technology risk management, means we are in a better place. But just hear what I said about liquidity. There are still pockets in the markets where I think we have to watch. And my concern is, often in the regulatory community, we're solving for the last crisis. We're looking through the rearview mirror when we need to be looking in the front window, which is why I think and it was started pretty much by the Fed. This concept of scenario planning, constantly thinking, where could the next risk come from? What is it? How would we respond? I think that's a sensible and very useful process.
So I have a couple more questions, and then we are going to open it up to the audience for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So start thinking.
Not, is the case maybe.
I can't let you get off the stage without talking about Brexit.
You saved the best for last, didn't you?
I got one more question after that. But anyways, what's going to happen in Britain? I mean, from afar, it's actually kind of confusing what's going on. It's like...
You're not kidding. I live there and it's confusing. I think we will get Brexit, there's no doubt, I'm pretty sure. I'm fairly confident that Boris Johnson will become Prime Minister either outright or he may hold the control of a hung parliament. And then we will have Brexit. But all that means is we've left the European Union. Then there's a transition period. And the Brexiteer fantasies will fade within about a year of this process. The EU will extract their pound of flesh. There is no doubt about it. And this is going to be a very long and painful process. It is going to be, and it is going to cause no end of problems for the British economy. So what we have to do once we get out is, for the transition period, we're still in the single market, we're still in the customs union, we still have to pay into the budget. We're still subject to a number of EU things. We're rule takers, not rule makers. And we have to negotiate a trade agreement. And as I said, the EU is not going to make it easy for us. And at the same time, Boris Johnson would like us to be a low tax, low regulation system. Well, the EU's not going to bear that. So we're going to be stuck in the washing machine, probably for quite some time. Okay, well, we'll do a deal with the Americans. We can't until we figure out what we're doing with Europe. And the Americans want access to food and health. And 80% of the British Parliament says NFW, you can't have it. So I think we're in a problem for quite some time.
All right, so it's clear that the Brexit will be painful for the British economy. Yep. What about the U.S. economy? What about us?
Who cares about the U.S. economy?
What about the Massachusetts economy?
You're a bunch of colonials. I think we're going to have anemic growth, very much so in the U.S., clearly in Europe, and we've got, you have some countries, for instance, Germany, who will have a fair amount. Nobody has much control, obviously, monetary policy in Europe because it's centrally managed. So they'll have to focus on fiscal. Some will be able to do it. The Scandies, Germany, France. Italy, Spain, they have no room for maneuver. So I think the problem with Brexit is that it will have a knock-on effect, clearly for Europe. I can't predict what goes on vis-a-vis this country. It's just, or how the economies are interacting. So it won't be, I think it'll be anemic, but I don't think that isn't going to cause the problem here, I don't think.
All right, last question for me, and then we'll open it up. So one thing's for sure, if you stayed in the U.S., you would never become a dame.
Well, I might have been, but not the kind of dame you're thinking of.
So what's the story behind Dame Amelia Fawcett?
Right. You don't know. It is a really secret process. Don't worry, it's entertaining in a minute. It's usually, that's the top of the tree in various orders. There are 5 orders. And that's usually for recognition for services that you've done to the Crown or to the government at a very senior level. Your name will have been put forward, usually for those by the Crown or the government. Lower down in the order, it's often done by other companies. And you don't know. You just get, the Queen is minded. What kind of language is that? The Queen is minded to make you a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire. For services to financial services, and that's all you know. You know nothing else. But the one that I always think of Boston when I think of this. As I said, I'm Lady Usher, the Purple Rod. So the Bishop of London, who's the third senior cleric in the English hierarchy, Anglican hierarchy, I knew him very well, Richard Charteris. He's, hatch-spatched and dispatched more royals than anybody knows. So everybody knows who he is. He's tall, big beard, white, pale, male, and stale. Very entertaining, deep voice. And his secretary calls up and says, would Dame Amelia be able to have lunch with Bishop Richard? Oh, of course, not a problem. And she moves the diary 6 months forward. When? Next Tuesday. Next Tuesday? Oh, she's supposed to be in Sweden, but I'm sure if she's not, she'd be delighted to. Where should she go? meet him at the deanery. So I go down to the city, go to St. Paul's, go to the deanery. He says, no, I don't want to eat here, we're going to go to Cote. And Cote's a mid-level brasserie chain in London. We walk in, and everybody knows it's the Bishop of London, right? So, quiet. And we trot to the back, and there's a bottle of wine on the table. I'm thinking, oh, I don't drink wine at lunch. I did that day, by the way. It was Meursault. I'm particularly fond of Meursault. Anyway, so I'm looking at my menu. And he says, I've been asked to ask you if you take on a new role. No, Richard, I won't. You don't even know what it is. It doesn't matter. I haven't got time. Can't do it, Richard. And he said, don't you want to know who's asking? Put your menu down. Yes, Richard, who's asking? The Queen. I'm like, oh, okay, right. What is it? He said, look, it won't take you any time. I said, Richard, anybody tells you that multiplied by 12, it's about the amount of time it's going to take. No, it really doesn't. He said, look, we have officials in the order. You know, the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, the head of the civil service, the head of the army, blah, blah. They're called officials. And then we have the gentleman usher of the Purple Rod. I'm thinking, this is Monty Python. Right? You know, next thing I know, I'm going to be Purple Stick. So, right. So what about that makes you think I'd be interested? Gentleman usher of the Purple Rod? And he said, well, every order, you have black rod for the Order of the Garter, you know, red rod for the Order of Michael and St. James, whatever, Michael and St. George, whatever. And then purple rod for the Order of the British Empire, and they're the person who looks after all the finances and signs checks and stuff. It takes no time at all. Okay. I said, Richard, my adopted country has given me 2 titles that would have made me the laughingstock in my playground on Beacon Hill. And he looks insulted. Why? Why? And I said, let's start with a dame. A dame is a hooker you slept with in the Bronx. And he starts to laugh, at which point the entire restaurant goes down, because this guy's laughing so hard. And I said, as for a purple rod, stop right there, I'm a bishop. So I am Lady Usher of the Purple Rod. I took it.
Thank you so much. I'm still laughing. Let's give Amelia and Shirley a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirley. My favorite paper.
My name is Carolyn Ferguson, and I am the chair of the Salute Committee. And I'm grateful to have Shirley and Amelia here today, grateful to have all of you. As Shirley had alluded to, we are going to open up for questions. We have 2 microphones on either side of the room, so I invite you to please stand and go to one of the microphones if you'd like to ask a question. And in the meantime, Shirley, just a quick thank you to you. We really appreciate having you as our voice within Massachusetts media. You speak to the benefits of diversity, including gender diversity, and you do such a great job of highlighting the research that we do. Even as I was sitting at my table, I saw the article come through that points to the 0-0 this year. So hot off the press, as they say.
This morning, you guys were #1 on the website. The Boston Club Census story.
All right, excellent. And Amelia, I think I speak for everyone in the room when I say that we all learned something from you today.
Yeah, what a dame is.
And I think a large majority of us also share your sentiment about not being backwards, about coming forwards. I really liked that. I'm going to put that in my pocket. So thank you. So I think we have a question. Oh, no, sorry. Maybe I'll ask one. So, Amelia, we talked a little bit about your lavender farm, and you said it's not a bad thing to have the chief operating officer type of experience that you've learned, that you've cultivated. And a lot of us, I think, come to a point in our career when we have, so much passion for something outside of what we do every day. And so wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you cultivated that and what landed you with the Chilcot companies today.
Sure. So I have a sheep farm high up in the Brecon Beacons in Wales. Needless to say, when I bought the farm 25 years ago, I did have sheep. That was a mug's game. I got rid of those. And I have a farmer who has the land. And a few years ago, it's actually about 2014, I think, I was thinking, I'd like to do something with this land. I have a 16th century farmhouse, beautiful land, but I'm not engaged with it. So I decided, serendipitously and stupidly, that I would try wine. Grapes, because believe it or not, climate change means we are making some, wine in the UK. So being a chief operating officer and about to embark on a big project, I hired a project manager to do a proper study about whether this was a good thing to do or a bad thing to do. You'll not be surprised that it was a bad thing to do. They checked air, soil, water. It turns out I'm in a very nice microclimate. It can be 5 degrees centigrade warmer up at my farm than it is in the valley floor. So you kind of get those Tuscan autumn mornings, which is lovely. But it said 3 years of good grapes, 3 years of bad grapes, 3 years of who knows grapes. Well, that's not any way to run a business. But it turns out the soil is beautifully draining, and lavender doesn't like wet feet. And of a type that was particularly conducive, and it literally grows like a weed. And after the first year, it became clear it was multiplying. And again, using my business background, I said to the gardener and some of the others, I said, first 1,000 plants were bought in Kent, different soil, different everything. I said, we're not buying any other plants from anybody else. Start taking cuttings, and we'll only ever, from now on, use our own. So since the first year, we've only used our own lavender. And then the question, what do you do with it? And I got a whole bunch of these kids around, and they said, well, I'd like a blanket that I could squeeze and it would make me feel good. So we make these blankets with lavender things to hang off it. Oh, I have dogs, they could use something for their coat. Anyway, long story short, that's what we do. And I adore it. And if you've spent your entire careers, you will have gathered from my rambling comments, doing financial services and things you can't touch. When you can say, I planted that, I weeded it, I harvested it, I dried it, I did this so that I could get the seeds off, I designed the products. It's kind of fun. So I love it. And I smell good, I'm told. For a change.
Thanks, Jane.
Hi, Carolyn. Amelia and Shirley, thank you so much for this discussion.
Can we just turn that microphone on for the questions, please? Thank you.
There it is.
Perfect.
There it is. So Carolyn, nice to see you. And Shirley and Amelia, thank you so much for this discussion. I so thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you to the Boston Club for having this forum. Amelia, question for you. Listening to your journey, it's fascinating. I love the way you started in New York, but you had your sights on London and you got there. And then you built this amazing career with all its twists and turns. And I know we're now in 2019, and I find myself talking with folks, and they always ask the question, what's that piece of advice that you would give to someone, let's say 5-10 years out, where we are today, which is, we've come from a place where we needed a lot of change. We're at a place where we still need change, but we're getting better. What piece of advice would you give to a female professional 5-10 years into their career?
It's the same advice I'd give to a male professional, so I should start there. Life is not a straight line. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I was. But I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to move back to Boston. I was going to have 2.5 children, a dog. I was hopefully going to run for Congress. I really was interested in doing that. You were in the 70s. You wouldn't necessarily be that way now. And that would be how my life would unfold. So I went to Wellesley, tick. Went to law school, tick. Went to New York, meow. And then, as you know, didn't end up staying in the law at all. And there's nothing about my career that's predictable. And once you get over, we all have pre-fixed ideas about what it is we can do and what it is we're going to do. And I would just counsel people to have an open mind. You will oftentimes be presented with things that kind of don't fit your perceived notion of what you, and this is important, can do. I think women can be much better about saying, yes, I can do that, even if I haven't got everything I need to do it, and men can help them get there. And I have to say, I didn't come out this time. I have been blessed with extraordinary sponsors and mentors since 1978, and they were all men. And they were in my department, outside my firm, and they've helped me even to today. So I think that's really important. But you need, and so then those are people going to help you, guide you when someone presents you with something that's not what you'd ordinarily want to do. And I think we have to take more risk. Life's more fun when you do. It's kind of scary. But I think there are a ton of opportunities now for talented people who are willing to take a little risk, who are going to work hard, who are going to bring expertise, who have enthusiasm, who have a wonderful sense of humor. I have to tell you one other story. At Morgan Stanley's chief operating officer, when an HR issue couldn't be dealt with at the desk level, the department level, the HR level, it came to the chief operating officer. And this woman was a managing director, very senior, lovely woman, and she claimed that she was being sexually discriminated by her manager. And I read, the legal books were this, by this, by this. And I interviewed people and I went through everything. And it was clear to me when I read it and talked to people, it wasn't sexual discrimination. This guy was just a terrible manager. So she comes in with her lawyer, and the next thing it goes outside to a tribunal. So she comes in with her lawyer and her friend. And we had me, the head of HR, our lawyer, and she says why she thinks she's being sexually discriminated, and she's crying, and I said, Jane, not her name, do you have children? And you can hear the lawyer going, and she said, she stops crying, she says, yes. Have you seen the movie Shrek? At which point it's becoming, what the Japanese call reverse spitting. I mean, next to me. And the head of HR is going, oh God, what's she gonna do? And I said, do you know that, yes, she says, she starts to smile. And I said, do you know the scene when the donkey's gotta cross the bridge? And she says, yeah. I said, well, that's what we got, a donkey on the edge. And she laughed, and I explained to her, he's a very bad manager, he needs to be moved on, he will be. But it's not a sexual discrimination case, it really isn't. And she walked away and she was fine, perfectly happy, and she stayed for the rest of her career. But sometimes humor, you have to have a sense of humor, it can be a bit of a leveler.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I'm Marty Jones for adding a little humor this morning, and also I think next year maybe a lot more of us will wear pink. In August in the U.S., about 200 corporations signed on to a Business Roundtable Statement of Principles, thinking more expansively about the role of corporations and obligation to more than their shareholders. With rising income inequality across the globe, I'm interested in your perspective on the role corporations can play in helping address some of those discrepancies.
I applaud you. I think what they did is brilliant, long overdue. I've seen from some of the companies I've worked in who do think more broadly. The Swedes are very good at this. They look way long term. And they're willing to take risk and make investments and do things and put things at the heart of what they do in a way that some of our traditional corporations haven't. So if I take Kinnevik, a Swedish company, 87 years old, sustainability, good governance, engagement with all stakeholders, including communities, we instill that in all the companies in which we invest. And we are willing to take some of the short-term hits, but we think those kinds of companies, and we've proved it over 87 years, those kinds of companies are going to produce long-term sustainable value. For example, I was in a meeting, I was talking to Tony about this, I was in a meeting in Dallas, Texas, with Cheryl Alston, who's the brilliant CIO of the Dallas Employee Retirement Fund. And she was explaining that post the crisis, women-managed funds and funds managed by people of color were deemed to be too risky by many investors and many consultants. And she decided with her board that they would allocate 10% of their annual budget to funds managed by or run by women and people of color. And it was so successful, they increased it to 15%. Roll forward, this is the wonderful thing about globalization in the good way. I'm on a call with our lead shareholder, one of the original families, and the CEO. We're talking about our new diversity framework that we're going to put out there. And I said, right, I told the story, I said, I may be a bear of little brain, but I don't understand why we can't do this. So we did. We were the first people in Scandinavia to do it, and probably the first people in Europe. And it has made a huge impact. So that may or may not help us in the short term. It'll definitely help us in the long term. I hope more companies will sign up to the compact. There is something that's been done in the UK for years called Business to Community, where companies sort of compete with each other to make sure that they're helping to build their communities. It's good in parts, but it is, I think, for the Brits, it's more about what you do and how you engage than a check. And I remember I teed up one of our employees to ask John Mack what he felt about community engagement. And he said, well, we write, $5 million checks, whatever, a year. And my entire European thing went, oh, geez. It's about being engaged in the community. And I think that is where the Europeans and I include the UK, I think, have been further ahead than the Americans have. So I like this initiative. I think it's brilliant. They should be applauded, and we need to expand it.
Hi, my name is Alana Rim, and I have a very brief question about your pink jacket.
About my what?
Your pink jacket.
Pinky!
Do you always wear pink? And if you do, how do you get away with it?
No, I don't. But I've only came over from London about 36 hours ago. I was a bit pale this morning, and I thought, you know what, if I wear pink, I won't look like I just came out from under a rock. So anybody who saw me at State Street yesterday would have seen me in actually a Tyrolean jacket, which is gray. But I wear it when I can.
Is Ashley Grisham. Thank you so much for the rules and the goals that you gave today. In notion with your third rule about making a contribution, do you believe in the notion of the only time you should be truly comfortable is when you're sleeping? And with that thought in mind, how have you made a contribution in a position that challenged you or made you feel uncomfortable in some way?
Sorry, say that again?
There was a notion that I was given that says you should only be truly comfortable when you're sleeping. And my question is, how have you measured the contributions you've made in a role that challenges you or has made you feel uncomfortable in certain situations?
Well, I'm very good at self-delusion, so I can tell myself that I've made a contribution. The more senior you are, unfortunately, the more you have, it's like I was hearing an interesting, I think it was on Radio 4 this morning in the UK, people who marry themselves. I find that very odd, but but the more senior you are, the more likely you're kind of going to be on your own, and people aren't, and if someone comes up to you and says, you did a great job, it's like, yeah, you would say that because I'm the chief operating officer or the lead director. So and by the way, I don't sleep very much, so that's a little easier, I never have. But I think if you like people, which I do, and you like to help people, and you can see that someone else has achieved something or enjoyed something or done something they wouldn't have been, and you've been able to help them, that's how I think you make a contribution. It's not monetary, it's not naming and shaming, it's not lists, it's something I think you get yourself inside because you've done something for somebody else and you can see. And that's true for business. Morgan Stanley, when I started, was $250 million of revenues. We were in Eurobonds, we were bleeding red ink. We were one office. If you went to a conference, they said, this is Amelia Fawcett from Morgan Grenfell. No, Morgan Stanley. Oh, sorry. This is Amelia Fawcett from Morgan Guarantee. We had 450 employees, and they're mostly American. A group of us in '96 went to the board and said, we can turn this into one of the major European banks, not European branches of American banks, but toe-to-toe with Deutsche. And for 10 years, we just executed against that plan. And when I left, it was $9 billion of revenues, $3 billion of profits, 15 offices, 12,000 employees. I can tell you, everybody knew who we were. And we had created a firm that was unique in Morgan Stanley because we focused also on culture change. And that was something you could actually see, but again, you could feel it. And people would come from New York and say, God, there's a really different feel about this place. So you get it in different ways, but as I said, I'm very good at deluding myself when I need to. Sometimes you do have to delude yourself. I know I'm doing a good job. I'm sure of it.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to both of you, really. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your preparedness.
Let's stay in touch.
Just to close quickly, as our president Rita said earlier, we look forward to connecting and collaborating with all of you in carrying out our mission to advance women leaders while also making sure that no woman stands alone. And as Tony Wolfman said earlier, we hope that management of boards and companies both in Massachusetts and beyond will continue to be less pale, male, and stale. So on behalf of all of us at the Boston Club, we look forward to working with you to make our community, our region, and our world not only successful economically, but also making an example of excellent leadership to the entire corporate world. Thank you very much for coming.